The tarmac at Murtala Muhammad International Airport was radiating a heat that felt like a long-lost embrace, but inside Victor's chest, there was a strange, cold vibration. He stepped off the plane, clutching a small, weathered leather journal. The only thing that hadn't changed in the 12 years he'd spent driving taxis and working double shifts in the freezing rain of London. He had sent every spare kobo home. Every pound sterling had been converted into the bricks, mortar, and marble of the mansion he'd seen only in grainy WhatsApp photos. He was the hero returning, the big brother who had bled so his family could breathe. But as he walked through the arrival gates, the extravagant welcome he expected wasn't there. There was no welcome home banner, no sobbing mother, no exuberant younger brother. Instead, there was only a driver he didn't recognize, holding a sign that simply read, Victor. When he reached his house, the gates swung open to reveal a scene that stopped his breath. There, on the sprawling balcony of the master suite, stood his younger brother, Jude. He wasn't wearing the grateful smile of a sibling. He was wearing Victor's favorite silk robe, sipping expensive cognac, and looking down at Victor like a trespasser on private property. If you gave up a decade of your life to build a future for the people you love, only to arrive and find them living your dream without you, would you walk away or burn it all down? Tell me in the comments if you've ever felt like your sacrifices were taken for granted. To understand why the sight of Jude on that balcony felt like a dagger, you have to understand the winter of 2014. Victor was 24, the eldest of two, standing over their father's fresh grave in a village where the dust seemed to swallow hope whole. Their father had died owing debts that made the local moneylenders look like vultures circling their small family home. Victor looked at Jude, who was then a skinny 19-year-old with brilliant eyes and a knack for numbers, and he made a silent vow. Jude will never know this hunger. A month later, Victor sold his father's small plot of land, the only inheritance they had to fund a visa and a one-way ticket to the UK. He didn't go there to see the Big Ben or live the London life. He went there to be a ghost. For 12 years, Victor lived in a shared room with 4 other men in Peckham. He worked 3 jobs, cleaning hospital floors at dawn, delivering crates at noon, and driving an unlicensed minicab until 3 in the morning. His hands, once soft from schooling, became mapped with scars and calluses. Every month, without fail, the ritual was the same. Victor would sit in a dimly lit Western Union booth, counting out notes that smelled like his own sweat. He sent money for Jude's university tuition, then money for Jude's MBA, then the big project, the house. Victor, the contractors need another 5 million for the Italian tiles. Jude would voice note him. And Victor would skip meals for 2 weeks, picking up extra shifts in the biting wind, just to make sure the family palace in Lagos was perfect. He looked at the photos Jude sent. The gold-flecked ceilings, the swimming pool, the manicured lawns, and he would smile through his exhaustion. That's my house, he'd tell himself. That's the reward for my pain. Their mother had passed away 4 years into his journey, her last words on the phone being, "God bless you, my son. You are the pillar holding this family up." After her death, Victor's bond with Jude became his only anchor. He didn't just see Jude as a brother, he saw him as his legacy. He bought Jude his first car from across the ocean. He funded Jude's import-export business that Jude claimed was growing. Victor was the engine, and Jude was the beautiful car that the world got to see. Victor had remained single, turning down the interest of kind women in London because, "I'm not ready yet. I have to finish the house. I have to settle Jude." He postponed his own life, year after year. He lived in the future, a future that was supposed to begin the moment he touched down in Nigeria. He had visions of Jude meeting him at the airport with the keys to a brand new SUV, driving him to the mansion where the best room, was waiting for him. They would sit together, 2 successful men, and Victor would finally be able to rest. He wanted to hear Jude say, "Thank you, brother. I couldn't have done it without you." He hadn't told Jude his exact flight time until he was already at Heathrow, wanting it to be a cinematic surprise. He wanted to see the shock of joy on his brother's face. He spent his last £300 on a designer watch for Jude, a well-done gift for supervising the building project so faithfully. As the plane hovered over the Atlantic, Victor looked at his own reflection in the window. He looked 10 years older than he was. His hair was thinning, and his eyes were tired. But he was happy. He was coming home to the life he had paid for in full. He was coming home to be the king of the castle he had built from 5,000 miles away. He had no idea that while he was building a home, Jude was building a fortress to keep Victor out. As the car pulled through the massive black gates of the estate, Victor felt a surge of adrenaline that temporarily masked his exhaustion. The house was even more magnificent than the photos had suggested. It was a monolith of white concrete and glass, shimmering under the Lagos sun. He imagined the smell of home-cooked jollof rice wafting through the air, the sound of Jude's laughter, and the overwhelming sense of relief that would come when he finally set his heavy bags down in his own foyer. He reached into his pocket and touched the cold steel of the designer watchbox, imagining the look of awe on Jude's face. "Wait until he sees this," Victor whispered to himself, a tired smile playing on his lips. He looked at the lush green grass of the lawn and the sparkling blue water of the pool. He had paid for every drop of that water, every blade of that grass. He expected Jude to come running out, perhaps even lifting him up in a celebratory hug. He expected the neighbors to see the return of the man who had turned a struggling family into a dynasty. The driver remained strangely silent, refusing to meet Victor's eyes in the rearview mirror. But Victor was too blinded by his own excitement to notice. He stepped out of the car, breathing in the thick, humid air. This was it, the finish line. He smoothed down his jacket, wanting to look every bit the successful elder brother. He felt a sense of pride so deep it almost brought him to tears. He had done it. He had survived the cold, the loneliness, and the grind. "Jude!" he called out, his voice echoing against the high walls of the compound. "Jude, I'm here!" He watched the curtains of the master bedroom twitch. He expected the front door to fly open. Instead, there was a heavy, lingering silence. He stood there in the driveway, surrounded by the luxury he had funded, feeling a sudden, inexplicable prickle of sweat on the back of his neck. The house was beautiful, but it felt strangely like a museum, pristine, expensive, and cold. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Finally, the front door opened, but it wasn't Jude who stepped out. It was a young woman, strikingly beautiful, dressed in a silk slip dress that cost more than Victor's monthly rent in London. She leaned against the doorframe, filing her nails, looking at Victor with a mixture of boredom and irritation. "Can I help you?" she asked, her accent polished and dismissive. Victor blinked, confused. I'm Victor, Jude's brother. This is my house." The woman let out a short, sharp laugh. "Your house? I think you have the wrong address, uncle. This is Jude's residence." "And who told you to just drive in here?" Victor's heart gave a hard, painful thud against his ribs. "Uncle?" He looked past her into the foyer. The interior was breathtaking marble floors, a crystal chandelier that looked like a frozen explosion of light, and expensive art on the walls. But as his eyes roamed, he noticed something chilling. On the grand piano in the hallway, there was a large, framed photograph. It was a wedding photo. Jude was standing there, looking sharp in a bespoke suit, and the woman at the door was draped in white lace beside him. Victor felt a wave of nausea. Jude had never mentioned getting married. In all their weekly calls, in all the thousands of messages, there had been no mention of a wife. "Where is my brother?" Victor's voice was lower now, stripped of its initial joy. "He's busy," the woman said, turning back toward the house. "You should have called first. This isn't a village where you just show up unannounced." Before Victor could respond, a shadow fell over the balcony above. He looked up and saw Jude. His younger brother looked different, heavier, more polished, with a beard that was perfectly groomed. He didn't look down with love. He looked down with a cold, calculated distance. "Let him in, Clara," Jude called out. His voice was smooth, devoid of the warmth Victor remembered. Victor walked into the house, his boots sounding like gunshots on the marble. As he entered the living room, he looked for his things. He had sent 6 large shipping crates ahead of his arrival, boxes filled with his clothes, his books, his electronics, and the few mementos he had kept of their parents. "Where are my crates, Jude?" Victor asked as his brother descended the stairs, trailing the scent of expensive oud. Jude didn't answer immediately. He walked to a bar cart, poured 2 fingers of cognac, and took a slow sip. "The crates? Ah, those. They were taking up space in the garage, Victor. I had them moved to the boys' quarters at the back. We needed the room for Clara's walk-in closet." Victor stared at him. The boys' quarters were the tiny, cramped rooms usually reserved for domestic staff. His life's possessions had been relegated to a shack behind the mansion he had built. "And my room?" Victor asked, his voice trembling. "The master suite on the ground floor I told you to prepare for me?" Jude laughed, and this time the sound was jagged. "Brother, you've been away too long. You don't understand how things work here now. That's the guest wing. And currently, Clara's mother is staying there. You can stay in the study for tonight. We'll figure out something more permanent tomorrow." Victor felt the floor beneath his feet turn into liquid. He reached out to steady himself against a mahogany side table, a piece of furniture he remembered approving via a blurry invoice 3 months ago. The study, Jude mentioned, was a windowless room tucked behind the kitchen, barely large enough for a desk and a cot. "Jude, what are you talking about?" Victor asked, his voice cracking. "I sent the money for this house, every block, every bag of cement, every wire in the walls. I sent 50 million naira just for the interior finishing. This isn't a guest situation, this is my home." Jude set his glass down on the marble counter with a deliberate, echoing clack. He turned to face Victor, and for the first time, the mask of brotherhood slipped entirely. His eyes were hard, reflecting the cold light of the chandelier. "Victor, let's be realistic," Jude said, his tone dripping with a patronizing sweetness. "You sent money, yes, but who was here? Who dealt with the corrupt contractors who tried to steal the land? Who spent 3 years in the sun supervising the laborers while you were sitting in a car in London? I built this. My sweat is in this foundation. You are just a bank." "The bank," Victor repeated, breathless. "Jude, I worked 16 hours a day. I didn't buy a new pair of shoes for 4 years so you could have this." Jude stepped closer, his expensive perfume filling the space between them. "And I thank you for that, really. But the documents tell a different story. When the CFO, certificate of occupancy, was issued, you weren't here to sign. The land is in my name. The building permit is in my name. Even the utility bills are in my name." Victor's hands began to shake. "Because I trusted you. You said it was easier for the paperwork if you handled it locally." "It was easier." Jude smiled, a thin, cruel line. "Easier for me. You see, Victor, the law doesn't care about sacrifices or intentions. It cares about signatures. In the eyes of the Nigerian government, you are a guest in Jude's house. And Clara doesn't like guests who stay too long." The woman, Clara, reappeared in the doorway, swirling a car key on her finger, the key to the Mercedes Victor had shipped from Antwerp 6 months ago. "Jude, honey, we're going to be late for the dinner at the Lagos Yacht Club," she said, not even glancing at Victor. Jude patted Victor's shoulder, a gesture that felt like a brand of hot iron. "There's some bread and eggs in the fridge. Rest up. We can talk about a severance package for your years of service tomorrow. But for now, please stay out of the main living area. We're having people over later, and you, well, you look a bit haggard, brother. It wouldn't look good for the brand." Victor stood alone in the grand living room as the sound of the Mercedes engine roared to life and faded into the distance. The silence that followed was heavier than the London fog. He began to walk through the house, his heart a frantic drum in his chest. He wasn't just looking at the rooms anymore. He was looking for himself. He climbed the stairs to the master suite, the room Jude had been standing in earlier. He pushed the door open. It was a temple of excess. A king-size bed with velvet headboards, a 7.5-inch television, and a walk-in closet that looked like a boutique. He opened the closet doors. Rows of designer suits, rows of Italian leather shoes, all bought with the business capital Victor had sent for Jude's import-export firm. Victor looked at the labels. Some of these shirts cost more than Victor's monthly grocery budget in Peckham. He moved to the bathroom and saw the gold-plated faucets. He remembered the night he'd worked a triple shift at the hospital, cleaning up blood and bile, just so he could send the extra $2,000 Jude said was vital for the plumbing. Then he saw it. Sitting on a vanity table was a small, silver-framed photograph. It wasn't of their mother or father. It was a photo of Jude and Clara standing in front of this very house, holding a sign that said, "Our dream home, finally finished." On the back of the frame, which had fallen over, Victor saw a date. The house had been completed over a year ago. A year ago. For 12 months, Jude had continued to ask for maintenance fees, land taxes, and security upgrades. For 12 months, Victor had been sending money to a house that was already finished, inhabited, and enjoyed by a woman he didn't know. Jude had been bleeding him dry, keeping him in the cold of London just to fund a lifestyle of pure luxury. Victor ran out of the master suite, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He headed for the boys' quarters at the back of the compound. He found his 6 crates sitting under a leaky corrugated iron roof. They hadn't even been opened. They were covered in dust and cobwebs. He pried one open with a rusted pipe he found nearby. Inside were his winter coats, his old books, and a collection of framed photos of him and Jude as children. He picked up a photo of them sitting on a bench in their village, Jude's arm around Victor's neck. Victor's younger self was smiling, looking proud of his little brother. He looked at the photo, then at the towering white mansion looming over the shack. The betrayal wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the house. It was the fact that Jude had watched him suffer from a distance. Jude knew Victor was sleeping on a sagging mattress in a room that smelled like damp. Jude knew Victor was skipping meals. And Jude had sat in this air-conditioned paradise, laughing with his wife and typing messages asking for just 1 more million. Victor felt a scream building in his throat, but it died before it reached his lips. A cold, sharp clarity began to settle over him. He realized he wasn't just a guest. He was a ghost in his own life. But ghosts have a way of haunting the people who try to bury them. He looked at the small leather journal he had carried from the airport. It wasn't just a diary. It was a ledger. Every penny, every transfer, every emergency Jude had ever claimed Victor had recorded it all. He walked back toward the main house, his footsteps no longer heavy with exhaustion, but light with a new, dangerous purpose. The clock on the wall of the grand foyer struck 11:30 p.m. when the headlights of the Mercedes swept across the living room walls. Victor was sitting in the dark, perched on a stiff, velvet-backed chair he had paid $3,000 for. He didn't turn on the lights. He just sat there, the leather journal resting on his lap like a loaded weapon. The front door swung open, and the sound of Jude and Clara's laughter filled the space, a sharp, jagged sound that grated against Victor's nerves. They were stumbling slightly, smelling of expensive wine and the salty air of the Lagos lagoon. Jude reached for the light switch, and the room exploded into a brilliant, clinical white. "Jesus, Victor, you scared me," Jude snapped, clutching his chest. "Why are you sitting in the dark, like a village masquerade? I told you to go to the study and sleep." Victor didn't move. "We need to talk, Jude." "Not tonight. I'm tired, and Clara has a headache," Jude said, trying to usher his wife toward the stairs. "I wasn't asking." Victor's voice was a low, vibrating hum. He stood up slowly. "I went to the back. I saw my crates. I saw the date on the photo in your bedroom, Jude. You've been living here for 14 months. For 14 months you told me the roof wasn't finished. You told me the floors were still bare dirt. You told me you were sleeping in a rented room in Surulere while you guarded the site." Jude's face shifted. The drunken playfulness vanished, replaced by a defensive, ugly sneer. He pushed Clara toward the stairs and stepped into the center of the room. "And so, what if I did? You were in London, Victor. You had pounds. You had a life. I was the one here dealing with the heat, the mechanics, the madness. I deserved to be comfortable." "Deserved?" Victor stepped into the light. "I lived in a room with 5 men, Jude. I worked 3 jobs. I haven't seen a doctor in 6 years because I couldn't afford to take a day off. Every time you called me crying about contractor issues, I sold something. I sold my car. I sold my watch. I even sold my plasma once when you said you needed money for land taxes or they would seize the property. You let me bleed, Jude. You watched me die in installments from 5,000 miles away. Oh, stop the drama, Clara shouted from the stairs, her voice shrill. You sent money because you wanted to feel like a big man. You wanted to be the abroad brother. Well, you're here now, and you're not a big man. You're just a tired old taxi driver with no house and no name. Jude did the work. Jude is the director of the company. You're just the sponsor. Victor ignored her, his eyes locked on his brother. Is that what I am, Jude? Just a sponsor? Not the brother who stayed awake at 4 a.m. to help you with your MBA assignments? Not the person who promised Papa I'd take care of you? Jude let out a dry, mocking laugh. Papa is dead, Victor, and those promises don't buy marble floors. You want to talk about betrayal? You stayed away for 12 years. You left me here to handle everything. You thought you could just buy your way back into a family? You bought the bricks, Victor, but I built the life. This house belongs to the person whose name is on the paper. And that name is Jude Williams, not Victor. The silence that followed was suffocating. Victor looked at the man standing before him, a man he had literally sculpted out of his own life's energy. Jude looked back with no remorse, only a cold, territorial hunger. I want you out by morning, Jude said, his voice now a flat, emotionless command. I'll give you 500,000 naira. Call it a thank you for the help, and you can go back to the village or back to London. But don't ever call yourself the owner of this house again. If you try to cause trouble, I'll call the police. And remember, I know the DPO. You know nobody. Jude turned his back, a gesture of total dismissal, and began to walk toward the stairs. Victor looked down at the journal. The confrontation hadn't gone the way he hoped. There was no apology, no realization. There was only the naked truth of Jude's greed. Jude, Victor said softly. Jude didn't stop. Go to bed, Victor. I didn't just keep receipts of the money, Jude, Victor said, his voice gaining a terrifying steadiness. I kept the emails from the contractors you said were charging me. I kept the bank statements from the import-export company you founded with my capital. And I spent my last week in London talking to a forensic accountant. Jude stopped on the third step. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders went rigid. Victor walked slowly toward the stairs, his voice echoing in the vast hollow space. You thought I was just a taxi driver, didn't you? You thought my brain had turned to mush from driving through the London streets. But you forgot one thing, Jude. I was the one who taught you how to do those MBA assignments. I was the one who reviewed your business plans before I sent the money. Victor flipped open the journal. You told me you were importing construction machinery from Germany. You sent me invoices from a company called Alpha Tech Logistics. But when I looked into Alpha Tech, I found something interesting. The company isn't registered in Germany. It's registered in Lagos, and the sole director isn't a German businessman. It's Clara's brother. Jude finally turned around, his face pale under the LED lights. Victor, you don't know what you're talking about. That's just a tax-saving measure. No, Jude. It's money laundering. Victor interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper. You weren't just building a house. You were funneling my hard-earned pounds into a shell company to fund Clara's lifestyle and her family's businesses. You told me the house cost 200 million naira. I've seen the actual site records you forgot to delete from the shared cloud drive. The house cost 80 million. You pocketed the rest, Jude. 120 million naira of my sweat, my blood, and my youth, gone. Clara's face went from arrogant to terrified. She looked at Jude, waiting for a rebuttal that didn't come. And there's more, Victor continued, stepping closer to the stairs. You told me our mother died of a sudden heart attack. You said the hospital bills were enormous and you needed 10,000 pounds for the funeral and the outstanding medical debt. I sent it within an hour. I didn't even eat for 3 days to make it happen. Victor's voice trembled with a grief so fresh it felt like a new wound. I went to the cemetery today before I came here, Jude. I spoke to the old caretaker. He remembers Mama. He said she didn't die in a private hospital. He said she died in the village house because she couldn't afford her blood pressure medication. He said she was calling your name, asking why you hadn't visited her in months. You didn't spend that £10,000 on her, did you? Jude opened his mouth, but only a dry, rattling sound came out. You used my mother's death to buy that Mercedes out there, didn't you? Victor's eyes were burning. You let her die in the dust while you were planning your wedding to Clara using the funeral money. The truth sat in the room like a heavy, rotting thing. The luxury of the mansion suddenly felt like a shroud. Jude looked small now, trapped on his own grand staircase. The power dynamic that had been established since Victor walked through the door was beginning to fracture. Victor, listen, Jude started, his voice shaking. It's not what it looks like. Mama. She was old. She was confused, and the business needed a boost. I was going to pay you back. With what? Victor asked, a ghost of a smile appearing on his face. With the money I was going to send next month for the pool maintenance? You didn't just take my money, Jude. You took my mother's dignity. You took my 12 years. You took the one thing I had left to believe in, the idea of family. Victor closed the journal with a finality that sounded like a coffin lid. You said the law cares about signatures, Jude. You're right, but the law also cares about fraud. And I didn't just bring a journal with me from London. I brought a laptop, and on that laptop is every fake invoice, every redirected wire transfer, and every lie you ever told in writing. The atmosphere in the room shifted from a heated family dispute to a cold, tactical arena. Jude stood paralyzed on the stairs, the weight of the Mercedes keys in his pocket suddenly feeling like lead. For the last decade, Jude had played Victor like a finely tuned instrument, knowing exactly which emotional strings to pull to keep the currency flowing. He had relied on Victor's guilt, his sense of duty, and his distance. But now, the distance was zero, and the guilt had changed hands. Victor didn't look like a tired laborer anymore. He stood tall, his hands steady, his gaze piercing through the expensive facade Jude had built. He realized in that moment that Jude's power was entirely parasitic. It required Victor's compliance to exist. Without Victor's money, Jude was nothing more than a man in a borrowed robe, living in a house built on sand. You think you're the only one who learned how to survive in a hard world? Victor asked, his voice calm and terrifying. London didn't just teach me how to drive a car, Jude. It taught me how to watch, how to wait, how to protect myself when I realized the only person looking out for me was me. Jude tried to reclaim his bravado, but it came out as a pathetic stammer. Victor, you wouldn't send your own brother to jail. Think of the family name. Think of what people would say. The family name? Victor echoed, a hollow laugh escaping his lips. You dragged our family name through the mud the moment you let our mother die without her medicine while you were picking out leather seats for a car. You ended the family, Jude. I'm just here to settle the estate. Victor walked to the center of the living room and sat back down in the velvet chair. He crossed his legs, looking every bit like a man who had finally come home to claim what was his. The frantic desperation that had consumed him since he stepped off the plane was gone, replaced by a strategic coldness. He wasn't reacting anymore. He was presiding. Jude descended the stairs slowly, his eyes darting toward the front door as if calculating an escape. Okay, Victor, you've had your say. You're angry, and you have every right to be. We can settle this. I'll give you the guest wing. I'll give you a seat on the board of the company. We can be partners. Partners? Victor's eyebrows rose. In a company that exists only to steal from me? No, Jude. I'm not interested in your paper kingdom, but I am interested in the Divine Acres project. Jude froze. The color drained from his face so completely he looked gray under the recessed lighting. How do you know about Divine Acres? I told you, Jude. I've been watching the accounts, Victor said, leaning forward. You didn't just steal my money to build this house. You used my name and my forged signature to take out a massive construction loan from a private equity firm in Ikoyi. You told them I was a high net worth investor based in the UK. You used my London tax returns, the ones I sent you to help with my Nigerian passport renewal, as collateral. Clara gasped, looking at her husband with newfound horror. Jude, what loan? You said the money for the new project was a grant. Victor turned his gaze to Clara. It wasn't a grant, Clara. It's a 300 million naira debt. And because he forged my signature as the primary guarantor, The debt isn't legally his, it's mine. If the project fails, which it will, because the land you bought for it is currently under government litigation, the creditors won't come for Jude, they'll come for me. The room went deathly silent. This was the ultimate betrayal. Jude hadn't just stolen Victor's past. He had mortgaged his brother's entire future. He had set a trap that would have seen Victor arriving in Nigeria only to be met by debt collectors and possible imprisonment for a loan he never signed. I had to do it, Victor. Jude suddenly burst out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. The import business was failing. The house was costing too much. I thought if I could just get the project started, I could flip the land and pay everything back before you ever found out. I was trying to make us truly rich. You were trying to make yourself untouchable at my expense. Victor corrected him. You didn't care if I spent the rest of my life in a Nigerian prison or a London gutter, as long as you could keep this lifestyle going. You bet my life on a lie. Victor stood up and walked to the large glass window overlooking the pool. But here's the thing about forgeries, Jude. They only work if the person whose name is on the paper stays silent. The private equity firm is called Stonebridge Capital, right? I've already been in contact with their compliance officer. I told them I'd be in Lagos this week to verify my investments. Jude fell to his knees on the marble floor. Victor, please. If you tell them it's a forgery, they'll arrest me immediately. It's a criminal offense. I'll go away for 20 years. Clara is pregnant, Victor. You can't do this to your own blood. Victor turned around, his face a mask of stone. The mention of a child, his future niece or nephew, pinched at his heart, but the memory of his mother dying in the village dust was a stronger, sharper pain. You should have thought about blood when you were signing my name to a death warrant, Victor said. You have until 6 o'clock tomorrow morning to decide how this ends. Either you sign this house over to me and confess the fraud to the bank so I can negotiate a settlement, or I walk into the police station and the bank headquarters myself. Jude stared up from the floor, his face a distorted mask of desperation. He looked at Clara, but she had retreated to the far corner of the room, her eyes wide with the realization that the golden life she had married into was evaporating. Victor reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He didn't throw it. He placed it precisely on the marble coffee table. Inside this envelope is a quitclaim deed and a transfer of ownership for this property, Victor said, his voice as sharp as a razor. I also have a drafted confession regarding the Stonebridge Capital loan. I've spent the last 3 months working with a lawyer in Lagos silently, via encrypted calls. He's the one who verified the C of O. He's the one who found the cracks in your shell companies. Jude reached for the papers with trembling hands. You planned this? You knew all this before you got on the plane? I hoped I was wrong, Victor admitted, a flicker of genuine pain crossing his face. I prayed that when I arrived, you'd tell me the truth. I gave you every chance tonight to be my brother. But you didn't just lie. You tried to humiliate me. You tried to cast me out of the home I built. Victor leaned down, his face inches from Jude's. The lawyer is waiting for my call. If I don't call him by 8 a.m. to tell him the documents are signed and notarized, he sends the digital copies of your forgeries directly to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC. You know how they handle Yahoo boys and corporate fraudsters, Jude. You won't be sipping cognac in a silk robe there. You'll be lucky to have a bucket. The power had shifted completely. The master of the house was now a beggar. The tired taxi driver was now the judge and jury. Victor felt no joy in it, only a grim sense of justice. He watched as Jude's arrogance crumbled into a pathetic heap of apologies and pleas for mercy. Sign the papers, Jude, Victor commanded. Sign them, and I might consider not handing you over to the authorities. You want to be a big man? Start by taking responsibility for the first time in your life. Just as Jude reached for the pen, a sharp, heavy knocking echoed through the massive front doors. The sound was authoritative, rhythmic, and chilling. Everyone in the room froze. "Is that the police?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Victor frowned. He hadn't called anyone yet. He looked at the security monitor by the door. Outside stood 2 men in dark suits, leaning against a black SUV with tinted windows. They didn't look like police. They looked like the kind of men who handled private problems for the Lagos elite. "That's Stonebridge Capital," Jude whispered, his eyes widening in terror. They said they were coming on Friday. Why are they here now?" Victor realized then that Jude's web of lies was even more tangled than he'd thought. Jude hadn't just forged Victor's signature. He had clearly missed a payment or triggered an internal alarm at the firm. The door burst open before anyone could move. The lead man, a tall, imposing figure with a scar running through his eyebrow, stepped in. He didn't look at Victor or Clara. He walked straight to Jude. "Mr. Jude Williams," the man said, his voice a low growl. "Our investors are very unhappy. We did a spot check on the Divine Acres site today. It's an empty swamp, and the government agents there told us the land belongs to the state. Where is our money?" The man finally turned his gaze to Victor. "And you must be the high net worth brother from London. We've been looking forward to meeting the man who guaranteed a 300 million naira loan with a taxi driver's tax returns." The man pulled out a tablet and showed a screen. It wasn't just the loan documents. It was a series of photos of Victor in London, photos Jude had sent to the bank to prove Victor's lifestyle. But in the photos, Victor was wearing his high-vis delivery vest, standing next to a crate of groceries. Jude had used the very evidence of Victor's struggle to mock him to the creditors, claiming Victor was undercover to hide his wealth. The irony was sickening. Jude had used Victor's poverty to convince the bank he was secretly rich, all while Victor was actually starving to keep the bank from Jude's door. "Wait," Victor said, stepping forward. "You've been lied to. All of you." The man with the scarred eyebrow, whose name was revealed to be Mr. Okoro, didn't flinch. He looked at Victor with the clinical detachment of a man who had seen every form of desperation Lagos had to offer. "Lies are the currency of this city, Mr. Victor," Okoro said, tapping his tablet. "But we deal in collateral, and right now this house is the only thing standing between your brother and a very dark cell, or worse." Jude was trembling so violently that his teeth audibly chattered. "Victor, please, tell them. Tell them you'll cover it. You have savings in London, you have the pension." "Shut up, Jude," Victor snapped. The sound was like a whip crack. He turned to Okoro. "You want your money, and I want my life back. This man forged my signature. He used my identity to build a house of cards. If you take him now, you'll spend 10 years in court, fighting a fraud case while your investors lose interest. Or, we can do this the clean way." Victor gestured to the quitclaim deed on the table. "He is currently signing this property over to me. As of 5 minutes from now, I am the sole owner of this estate. I am prepared to liquidate the property immediately. I have a buyer, a contact from my years in London, who is looking for a Lagos foothold. You will get your principal back, and I will take what's left to settle the rest of the family debts." "And what about Jude?" Clara cried out, stepping toward Victor. "Where are we supposed to go? I'm carrying his child." Victor looked at her, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of pity, not for her, but for the child who would be raised by two people who valued gold over blood. "You have the Mercedes," Victor said coldly. "And you have the jewelry Jude bought you with my money. Sell them. Move back to the village. Start over where the air is honest." Jude looked at the pen in his hand, as if it were a poison needle. "Victor, if I sign this, I have nothing. I'm a beggar." "No," Victor said, leaning over him. "If you sign this, you're a man who isn't in prison. That's more than you deserve. I spent 12 years having nothing so you could have everything. It's time we swapped roles. Sign. Now." With a sob that sounded like a dying animal, Jude pressed the pen to the paper. He signed the house away. He signed the land away. He signed away the lie he had lived for the last decade. "Mr." Okoro watched the process with a grim nod, then took a copy of the notarized document. "You have 48 hours to initiate the transfer, Mr. Victor," Okoro said. "If the money isn't in escrow by then, we come back. And we won't be knocking next time." As the heavy SUV pulled away, the silence that returned to the mansion was absolute. Victor stood in the center of the hall, the deed in his hand. He was the owner of a multi-million naira mansion, but he had never felt more homeless. He looked at Jude and Clara, who were huddled together on the marble floor, the king and queen of a fallen empire. "Get out," Victor said, his voice barely a whisper. "Take your clothes, take your shame, but leave the keys on the counter. If I see either of you on this property after sunrise, I call the EFCC." 6 months later, the family palace was no longer white. The new owners, a quiet elderly couple who had retired from the oil industry, had painted it a soft, earthy cream. Victor watched them from across the street, sitting in the back of a modest silver sedan. He hadn't moved into the mansion. He couldn't. Every time he stepped onto that marble, he smelled the medicine his mother never got. He felt the cold of the London nights. He had sold the house within a month. The proceeds had cleared the Stonebridge debt, paid off the remaining village creditors, and left Victor with a sum of money that, while not enough to make him a billionaire, was enough to ensure he would never have to drive a taxi in the rain again. He had moved to a quiet suburb on the outskirts of Ibadan, far from the frantic greed of Lagos. He bought a small, 3-bedroom bungalow with a large garden. He spent his mornings planting hibiscus and his afternoons reading the books he had kept in those 6 crates for years. The big man status Jude had craved held no interest for him. Victor wanted only peace. He had received letters. Jude had sent several, written from a cramped apartment in a dusty part of the mainland. He spoke of the hardship, of how Clara had left him when the money ran out, and how he was struggling to find work because his reputation in the business community was scorched. He begged for a small loan to start a new business. Victor had read each letter once, then burned them in the garden. He didn't do it out of malice, but out of a need for survival. He realized that Jude was a black hole. No matter how much light you poured into him, he would always remain dark. One afternoon, Victor visited his mother's grave. He had commissioned a new headstone, simple, elegant, made of solid granite. He sat by the grave for a long time, talking to her as if she were still there. "I'm sorry I stayed away so long, Mama," he whispered. "I thought I was building a kingdom for us. I didn't realize I was just building a wall." He felt a strange lightness as he walked back to his car. For 12 years, his identity had been tied to the sacrifice. He was the provider, the martyr, the anchor. Now, he was just Victor. He had no one to save, no one to fund, and no one to impress. He had started a small foundation in his mother's name, providing basic blood pressure medication and healthcare to the elderly in their home village. It wasn't a grand project that made the news, but every time he saw an old woman smile as she received her monthly kit, Victor felt a piece of his soul heal. He was finally doing what he had set out to do. 12 years ago, he was taking care of his people. Only this time, he was doing it with his eyes open. He checked his phone. A message from a local librarian. He'd been seeing a woman who liked him for his stories, not his bank balance. Asked if he wanted to come over for dinner. Victor smiled. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to calculate the cost of the meal. He didn't have to check the exchange rate. He just had to show up. The tragedy of Victor's journey isn't just the money lost or the years spent in the cold. It is the realization that loyalty without boundaries is an invitation to your own destruction. We are often taught that family is an unbreakable bond, a sacred pact that justifies any sacrifice. But the human heart is complex, and sometimes the people we are trying to save are the ones who will eventually drown us if we don't let go. Jude's betrayal was born from a specific kind of psychological rot, the entitlement of the one who receives. When you give too much for too long, the recipient stops seeing your sacrifice as a gift and begins to see it as a debt you owe them. To Jude, Victor wasn't a brother. He was an automated resource. The lesson here is profound. You cannot build a future for someone who refuses to build their own character. High-value sacrifice is only virtuous when it is met with high-value gratitude. If you find yourself hiding your struggles to make someone else's life easier, be careful. You might just be funding the lifestyle of the person who will eventually claim they did it all without you. In the end, power shifted not because Victor became rich, but because Victor became awake. He realized that his worth wasn't tied to the mansion he built, but to the truth he carried. True peace doesn't come from owning the biggest house on the street. It comes from knowing that the hands that built your life are your own, and that no one can take your peace of mind unless you hand them the keys. Trust is a bridge that must be built from both sides. If you are the only one laying bricks, you aren't building a relationship. You are building a pier into an empty ocean. The sun began to set over the rolling hills of Ibadan, casting a deep golden orange glow across Victor's garden. He sat on a simple wooden bench, the kind his father used to favor, holding a glass of cold water. In the distance, the sound of children playing and the faint rhythm of a neighbor's radio created a symphony of ordinary, beautiful life. He pulled the small leather journal from his pocket, the one that had traveled across oceans and through years of tears. He looked at the last page, filled with the messy calculations of a man trying to survive. With a slow, steady hand, Victor tore the page out. Then another and another. He let the wind catch the paper, watching the remnants of his 12-year nightmare dance through the air like white birds before settling into the grass. He closed the empty book and leaned back, closing his eyes. The air was warm, the shadows were soft, and for the first time in a decade, Victor wasn't running. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was home. This story is Storytelling by Divine Tales. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment for more powerful stories.